time for my daily hot take. The web is an absolute mess. Oh my god, I can't believe Brodie just said that. Time to cancel him on Twitter! But in all seriousness, the web actually is a giant mess. There are so many of these fundamental core projects developed and maintained by one or two random people with basically no funding. There is a little heavy emphasis on the air quotes project you may know if you're at all involved in web development. That project is CoreJS. But in reality, it is not little whatsoever. It has 51,524 dependents and 35 million weekly downloads. And unlike some of the random little projects we've seen, this is not just some dumb project that shouldn't exist. This is fundamental to making use of modern JavaScript. It is a modular standard library for JavaScript, includes polyfills for ECMAScript up to 2023, promises, symbols, collections, and all of this other junk, basically taking the mess that is JavaScript on a web browser where all of these different web browser versions exist and then completely standardizes that up to the latest version of the JavaScript ECMAScript standard. And it is used by some of the biggest services out there, whether that's WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Netflix, eBay, Apple, The Hub, The Hamster, PayPal, TikTok, AliExpress, Twitch, Amazon. The list goes on and on and on. Roughly 52% of the top 1,000 websites make use of CoreJS. There are very few projects this prolific. One of the other few is jQuery. But much like a lot of the fundamental web projects, he is not employed by any of these companies to do this work. And after over a decade of this, he is sick of companies basically just walking all over him and not trying to fund this project. So very recently added this onto the GitHub. So what's next? And right now, this is also the README. But unlike similar situations like LeftPad, this time I feel a lot of sympathy for the dev. You may not agree, and maybe you're going to think he is a bad person, but at least listen to his story before coming to a conclusion. I would also highly recommend you go and read it for yourself. This is incredibly long, and we are going to be skimming over it and looking at the important parts. Back in 2012, he became a full-stack JavaScript developer. At this time, CoreJS didn't exist, but it really needed to, because JavaScript was even more of a mess than it is now. Node was still at version 0.7, we were in the era of ECMAScript 3, we were in the era of Internet Explorer. Things were just a mess. Everyone did things a little bit differently, let alone the fact that all of these different versions were available that all did things differently as well. So if you wanted to write something with JavaScript, you probably shouldn't. This is why back then, Flash was incredibly popular. And while they were fairly young, both transpilers and polyfills did exist. Transpilers to deal with the syntax problems, and polyfills offering a consistent standard library regardless of what underlying version of JavaScript is available. The issue is there wasn't really anything that did everything. You had all of these different libraries, all of these different transpilers that addressed different parts of JavaScript. What needed to exist is one project that made everything standard. And this developer, for his own work, took on this challenge, and eventually 2 years later released this publicly as CoreJS. And he says, maybe it was the biggest mistake in my life. And this is where the problem started to happen. Since I was not the only one who faced these issues, after a few months, CoreJS had already become the de facto standard of JavaScript standard library feature polyfill. CoreJS had been integrated into Babel. At that point, was still called 6.5, and after some months, CoreJS was integrated into key web frameworks. And that sounds great. This project is taking off and everybody is using it. But this dev made the mistake that I see a lot of FOSS devs making. He focused on development. I didn't promote myself or the project. This is the second mistake. CoreJS hadn't a website or social media accounts, only GitHub. I did not show up at conferences to talk about it. I almost didn't write posts about it. I was just making a really useful and wanted part of the modern development stack, and I was happy about that. Basically, nobody was aware that a single person was basically holding up the entire modern web stack. It could have been 100 people. It could have been a company. He put no effort into making people know that a single person was making this incredibly important project. But unlike many other devs out there, he fully acknowledges doing this. And I'm not going to hold this against him because so many FOSS developers do the exact same thing. They have a GitHub with GitHub sponsors. They maybe get like $5 a month, but the project has like 5,000 stars. Put yourself out there and let people know that you are the one making this. And being this single dev that's not really being funded, this works fine early on. But JavaScript is not a static standard. The ECMAScript standard is always going to be changing, and this is not a library that's several lines you can write and forget about. Unlike the vast majority of libraries, it's bound to the state of the web. It should react to any change of JavaScript standards or proposals, to any new JS engine release, to any detection of a bug in JS engines, etc. This is a lot of work. So he did what any sensible dev is going to do with a project that has tons of users. He went out there to look for new maintainers. And he realized a problem. Even though CoreJS is incredibly popular and the de facto standard for polyfills, most people didn't use CoreJS directly. They used Babel, which used CoreJS. When it came up in discussion, a lot of people thought it was just a small library. It was not a trendy and widely discussed project, so why help maintain it if it works great anyway? And this is where he made the third mistake. Rather than slowing down the development or abandoning the project, he knew how incredibly important CoreJS was and know that someone needed to maintain it. So, to keep up the development effort, he left a high-paying job and did not accept some very good options because in those positions, I did not have the opportunity to devote enough time to work on open source. I started to work on open source full-time. No one paid me for it. I hoped sooner or later to find a job where I could fully dedicate myself to open source and web standards, and periodically, I earned money required for life and work on FOSS on short-term projects. And he returned to Russia because living there is considerably cheaper. He spent about 18 months with contracts working on the project, and an extra 6 months fully dedicated working on nothing else. And until April 2019, everything was going fine. That was until he went to prison. Now, as he's the one writing it, the story that he tells is only from his perspective. I don't know if this is the way it exactly went down, but I'm just going to take his word for it, just so we can move on to the rest of the story. Also, if you want to skip this section, go ahead and do so. So, according to him, one April night at 3 AM, I was driving home. Two drunk 18-year-old girls in dark clothes decided somehow to crawl across a poorly lit highway. I don't know how poorly lit, but let's just assume it was really badly lit. One of them lay down on the road, another sat down and dragged the first. But not from the road, directly under his wheels. And that's what witnesses at the time said as well. He had absolutely no chance to see them. Now, I've heard some people say there's no way you could miss a person on the road. If you've ever driven down a road that is poorly lit, like in a country area, yes, it's very easy to miss things, especially that early in the morning. One of the girls didn't make it through, and the other one was sent to the hospital. Now, Russia is not known for having the most, we'll say, sensible legal system. And even though in most places he probably wouldn't have been found guilty, in Russia he had to pay $80,000 in damages to the victim's family, and possibly spend 7 years in prison. However, because he'd been spending all this time working on open source, making basically as little money as possible to survive and work on his project, he was basically broke. Luckily for him though, even though the prosecutor wanted 7 years, he only ended up spending 10 months. This is due to being a good prisoner and, not starting things in the prison. But this didn't exactly help him with the monetary issues. Luckily though, a few months prior, he had attempted to monetize the project. But since he didn't really have any social media presence, he didn't really have any way to get the message out. Pretty much all he could use was the README on the GitHub and the NPM page, and he got a grand total of $57 a month, which is more than zero, but also less than some slaves make. So, not exactly good money. Most people are not going to read the README, whether it's on GitHub or NPM, as most people aren't using it directly. But what he does have is a giant install base. Now, he is one of the major reasons why you are not allowed to advertise in an NPM package. He had a great idea. He added a post-install message. Thank you for using CoreJS. It is available here for polyfilling JavaScript standard library. This project needs your help. Please consider supporting CoreJS on Open Collective or Patreon at these links here. Also, the author of CoreJS is looking for a good job. And he expected this to go over relatively okay. Obviously, not every single user was going to donate. Maybe like a couple of extra dollars here and there. Maybe you could get him to like, $300-400 a month, which is not good, but much better than $57. And he planned to delete the message after a couple of weeks, but he had no idea what he set in motion. This led to a giant backlash. NPM bans terminal ads, and his project was a core, it's not mentioned in this one, but his project was a core part of the reason why this happened. It led to multiple issues on his own GitHub, say this one right here, remove author's job search ad to conform with new NPM policy, NPM CTO announces ban on terminal ads, and this led to a giant discussion. It also led to issues on other repos, like Storybook, get rid of the harmful effects of Zeloy the developer, and his CoreJS library, and also some popular Reddit threads like this one over on r/programming. Now, to be fair, he wasn't doing himself any favors, so when someone asked him to remove it, he said, if NPM will ban the post-install message, it will be moved to browser's console. If NPM will ban CoreJS, it will cause problems for millions of users. I warned about it, and this is another issue asking about the exact same thing. He was kind of, in many ways, acting like the left pad developer, and people were kinda worried about what was gonna happen. But this was 3 years ago, and the project kept going. Everyone just thought he was bluffing, and nothing was gonna happen. Now, on the bright side, the controversy did lead to a bit of support. A few users and small companies supported the CoreJS, and I am very grateful to them. However, Within 9 months, it only collected about 1/4 of the money that should have been collected within a couple of weeks to change something, that being the 80 grand he needed. So he got about 20 grand from the controversy. Now back to the prison story. When this happened, the project kinda freaked out and had no idea what was going on. This issue was created, state and governance of the project. People knew the developer was in prison, and nobody knew what was going to happen to the project. Is CoreJS now dead? At this point, it was already still like a massive project. Nobody was stepping up to like properly maintain it. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Now, luckily, he does have some friends. So there is a maintainer called Slow Cheetah, and he was already given developer access to the repo. And while Zoloy was in prison, he temporarily took over the project. Now, being in Russian prison, so not a good prison, he didn't have any internet access. So he had absolutely no idea that a lot of people out there basically started to hate him, and hated all the work he did, and didn't have any respect for him as a person. But here's the thing. Once he found out, obviously it bothered him, but it didn't stop him working on the project. Once he got out of prison, I returned to CoreJS maintenance like it was before. Moreover, I completely stopped being distracted by contracts and any other work in favor of working on CoreJS. CoreJS had some money on funding platforms, not so much, many times less than I received for starting work on CoreJS full-time. But for me alone, it was enough for life. A kind of downshifting, full-time open source for making the world better. I didn't think about the tens of thousands of dollars in lawsuits left over from the accident. I didn't think about the tens of thousands of dollars in lawsuits left over from the accident. I didn't think about my future. I thought about a better future for the web, and of course, I was hoping that some company would offer me a position with the opportunity to work on web standards and would sponsor my work on polyfills and FOSS. And over the next 2 years, a lot of work was done. He says, almost the same as in the previous 8 years. He was grinding hard, working on making this project better. He knows that the web will collapse without CoreJS existing. Now, don't forget, he is in Russia, and because of the lawsuits, he couldn't leave. And over the past year, being in Russia hasn't made anything any better. So at the height of the funding, after all of the controversy, he was making $2,500 a month, which before tax puts it at around $28,000 a year, which is not a small amount of money, but is considerably smaller than it was making as a full-time dev. This, over time, because he didn't have any way to advertise it, decreased to $1,700 a month, with $1,000 via Tidelift, $600 via the Open Collective, and $100 via Patreon. And as is normally the case, every so often a one-off donation. And because a ton of people were asking, he made a crypto wallet. Even though a ton of people were asking, only 2 transfers for a total amount of $200 had been received, which, once again, is not nothing, but with how many people were asking, he expected a lot more to come in. That's pretty reasonable. But he also couldn't do GitHub sponsors, because that's not available in Russia and never was. Same with PayPal. It's been banned for Russians. And the biggest consistent donor was a project called Bower. I've never used Bower before. It is a package manager for the web. It could be great. It could be bad. I have no idea. Either way, they were giving him $400 a month. But you might have noticed something. Even though all of these top 1,000 websites were making use of this project, none of them were sending money his way. They could lose $1,000 a month and not even notice it. And then the war happened. The rest of his solutions were working just fine, but Tidelift, the one he was getting most of his money from, became a problem. They just didn't send him any money. They just held the money, and they claimed they were sending it to him, but he never got any. So, over the past year, $1,000 a month just completely vanished. And because he still wasn't advertising on any other platforms, slowly the donations continued to drop down to $400 a month. And he was spending 250 hours on this. Now, any of you who might have passed, grade 5 maths probably knows that's a lot more than 40 hours a week. But every so often, he'll see comments like this. Just thinking out loud, has anyone tried extortion for open source software funding? This project needs X a month in contributions or will receive no maintenance, no updates, no bug, or security fixes. It is a very nice project. It's a shame if something were to happen to it. Sounds like the CoreJS approach. Okay guys, if you want it, let's use such an approach. Depending on your feedback, CoreJS will soon follow one of the following ways. 1. Appropriate financial backing. Enough money to both survive and also hire maintainers so he's not doing everything himself. In this case, somewhere around $30,000 a month would be enough to do this. However, he is willing to work on it by himself if the money is considerably less, but still enough to actually justify it. 2. I may be hired by a company where I'll be able to work on open source and web standards. Option 3. CoreJS will become a commercial project if it will not have appropriate support from users. Now, you couldn't just do this with the current version, so the next major release would have a free version which is significantly limited, and then a paid version with all of the extra functionality. I don't know of many web libraries that do this. I don't know if this would actually work out too well, but considering how ingrained it is into the web ecosystem, I wouldn't be surprised if it works at least to some extent. And the final option is a slow death, in case I'll see that CoreJS is not required. He has some ideas that could make him money that would be commercial projects, and if he goes and follows them and just abandons the project, that's what will have to happen. Maybe he'll come back if enough donations happen to justify working a couple of hours, but besides that, it's just gonna sit there doing nothing. And you might be tempted to say, okay, well, we'll just pin the dependency and never update it. And yes, you can do that. But the whole point of CoreJS is to get access to the latest JavaScript features. If you're not getting access to the latest JavaScript features, you're kind of defeating one of the major selling points of using the project. Also, as engines change and new bugs are introduced, over time, you'll see it be less and less functional. But you might say, it's open source, we will just fork it. Good, he wants you to fork it. He's been looking for maintainers for years. If someone wants to take the project over, he is fine with that. The problem is nobody wants to do it, because it's a lot of work, and the only project that could reasonably do it is Babel, and Babel relies on CoreJS, and even they just don't have the resources to reasonably maintain it. But even though the story is bad, it does have a bit of a silver lining. This got a lot of attention, so he's been getting a lot of Bitcoin donations. Right now, 1 Bitcoin is still sitting in his wallet. I believe another Bitcoin was also sent that's already been taken out. His Patreon has risen quite a bit. $3,000 a month now. Still, also that's Australian dollars. Still less than he would make as like a full-time dev. Much, much better than he was making before. And over on the Open Collective, I don't even know how much this is raised by. Let's have a look-see. This has gone up about $7,000 since I looked at it last time. While this is the biggest attention he's gotten, it's just the start. It's very possible that over time, things are going to drop off again, and in 5 years from now, we're going to see the exact same blog post. I really hope that some of the companies that rely on CoreJS actually give, a one-off $5,000 donation, a one-off $10,000 donation. It's nothing on your books, and you've done it plenty of times before, and all of you rely on this project. Now, as I said at the start, I highly recommend you go and read the blog post yourself. It is far more depressing than I made it out to be. I sort of covered the surface level and added my commentary. Go and read it. But once you do, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Did you know about CoreJS? Are you a web developer? Do you make use of it? Do you probably do? Do you use it directly or use it through something else? I would love to know. And if you liked the video, go and like the video. And if you really like the video and, you want to donate to my stuff, go and do so. Otherwise, go and send money to this developer. He is doing a lot of great things and deserves the attention. So that's going to be it for me, and I'm out.